The Tuskegee experiment, or Tuskegee syphilis study, was a study conducted between 1932 and 1972 by the United States Public Health Service and the CDC on a group of nearly 400 African Americans with syphilis. The purpose of the study was to observe the effects of the disease when untreated. There were 3 medical professionals that were directly responsible in administering this study: Dr. Eugene Dibble, an African American physician, Dr. Raymond A. Vondeler, a white physician, and Eunice Rivers, an African American nurse. Now, we will get into the direct roles that each of these clinicians had as we go further into the video. To understand this study and understand how something so atrocious could come to be, you must examine the scientific and medical authorities during this time period. Extremely harmful pseudoscientific ideas, specifically about the sex drives and genitals of African Americans, existed. It was widely believed that while the brains of African Americans were underdeveloped, their genitals were overdeveloped. Black men were seen to have a deep perversion for white women, and all African Americans were seen as inherently immoral with large sexual appetites. Now, some might ask, why does any of this matter? Well, this all matters because it was with these very understandings of race, sexuality, and health that researchers undertook the Tuskegee study. It was believed that Black people were extremely prone to sexually transmitted infections like syphilis. Low birth rates and high miscarriage rates were universally blamed on STIs. They also believed that all Black people, regardless of their education, background, economic, or personal situations, could not be convinced to get treatment for syphilis. So that is how the public health system could justify the Tuskegee study, calling it a study in nature rather than an experiment, meant to simply observe the natural progression of syphilis within a community that wouldn't get treatment. The study was initially set up in Macon County, Alabama, due to estimates that 35% of its population was infected with syphilis. Now, this study was actually modeled after a similar study done in Oslo, Norway in 1928 on several hundred white males that had syphilis and were untreated. These were patients who had already contracted syphilis but had remained untreated for some time. The U.S. Public Health Service decided to build on the Oslo work and perform a study to complement it, which is what became known as the Tuskegee study. Now, at that time, it was believed that the effects of syphilis depended on the race of those affected. Physicians believed that syphilis had a more pronounced effect on an African American's cardiovascular system than on their central nervous system. So with the study in Oslo being on white males with syphilis left untreated, the Tuskegee study would now be on Black male subjects with syphilis left untreated. So in 1932, the initial patients between the ages of 25 and 60 were recruited under the pretense for receiving medical treatment for bad blood. Researchers faced the lack of participants due to fears that the physical examinations were actually for the purpose of recruiting them for the military. So to quell those fears, doctors began examining women and children as well. Men diagnosed with syphilis who were of the appropriate age were recruited for the study. And as an incentive for participation in the study, the men were promised free medical care, hot meals, and $500 burial insurance. However, they were deceived and never informed of their syphilis diagnosis, despite the risk of infecting others and the fact that the disease could lead to blindness, deafness, mental illness, heart disease, bone deterioration, the collapse of the central nervous system, and death. Instead, the men were told that they were being treated for bad blood. And in those days, bad blood was used to describe everything: syphilis, anemia, fatigue. Now, at the beginning of the study, major medical textbooks had recommended that anyone with syphilis should be treated, because if not, the consequences would be quite severe. At that time, treatment included medicines with arsenic-based compounds. Initially, subjects were studied for 6 to 8 months and then treated with contemporary medicines, ointments, and other highly toxic compounds. Additionally, men in the study would be administered disguised placebos, ineffective methods, and diagnostic procedures, which were misrepresented as treatments. Okay, now basically meaning these patients were given a bunch of nothing, pretending that it was actually something. During this time, participants remained ignorant of the study clinicians' true purpose, which was to observe the natural course of untreated syphilis. It was not to treat them. Study clinicians could have chosen to treat all infected subjects and close the study, or split off a control group for testing with penicillin. Instead, they continued the study without treating any participants. They withheld treatment and information about penicillin from the subjects. In addition, scientists prevented participants from accessing syphilis treatment programs available in the area. Now, the researchers reasoned that the knowledge gained would benefit humankind. That is how they wrestled with their moral dilemma. They reasoned that the knowledge gained would benefit the world. However, it was determined after the doctors did harm the subjects by depriving them of appropriate medical treatment. Once their syphilis had been discovered, depriving them of treatment was immoral. The study was characterized as the longest non-therapeutic experiment on human beings in medical history. Now, it's often wondered if Nurse Eunice Rivers, did she actually know the true purpose and methods of the study? Did she know the men were not being treated, or was Nurse Rivers a victim like the men? Now, it's very clear that the physicians, Dr. Vondler and Dr. Dibble, knew exactly what was taking place with these men. Dr. Vondler, he was actually the on-site director of the research program and was directly responsible for gaining the consent of the subjects for their spinal taps. He advertised the spinal taps as a special free treatment. He also met with local black doctors in the area and asked them to deny treatment to participants in the Tuskegee study, making it impossible for them to receive medical treatment or second-hand opinions from any other outside professional. Dr. Eugene Dibble worked alongside Dr. Vondler, and being that he was an African-American physician, participants in the study often trusted him. They felt that he would not steer them wrong with him being black, and he was the one that frequently administered the painful spinal tap procedures. Nurse Eunice Rivers, who had trained at Tuskegee Institute and worked at its hospital, was recruited at the start of the study to be the main point of contact with the participants. She played a crucial role in the study because she served as a direct link to the black community. Dr. Vondler considered her participation to be the key to gaining the trust of the subjects and promoting their participation. As a part of Miss Rivers' Lodge, participants would receive free physical examinations, free rides to and from the clinic, hot meals on examination days, and free treatment for minor ailments. Nurse Rivers was also key in convincing families to sign autopsy agreements in return for funeral benefits. She was the only study staff person to work with these participants for the full 40 years. Now, this was a time period when the U.S. was at war and men of all races were being drafted into the armed forces to fight in World War II. 256 of the infected subjects that were enrolled in the Tuskegee study registered for the draft and were, of course, found to have syphilis at the time of their physicals. They were ordered to obtain treatment before they could be taken into the armed services. However, public health researchers prevented these men from getting treatment, which further deprived them of chances for a cure because they were part of the Tuskegee syphilis study. Doctors asked that these men be excluded from the list of draftees needing treatment in order to make it possible for them to continue the study on an effective basis. Now, by 1947, penicillin had become standard therapy for syphilis. The U.S. government sponsored several public health programs to form rapid treatment centers to eradicate the disease. But when campaigns to eradicate venereal disease came to Macon County, home of the Tuskegee study, researchers prevented their subjects from participating. By the end of the study in 1972, there were only 74 of the test subjects still alive. Of the original 399 men, 28 had died of syphilis, 100 died of related complications, 40 of their wives had been infected, and 19 of their children were born with congenital syphilis. In 1966, Peter Buxton, a PHS venereal disease investigator in San Francisco, sent a letter to the national director of the Division of Venereal Diseases, expressing his concerns about the ethics and morality of the study at Tuskegee. The CDC, which by then controlled the study, reaffirmed the need to continue the study until completion, basically meaning until all subjects had died and been autopsied. Buxton finally had enough, and he went to the press in the early 1970s. The story broke first in the Washington Star on July 25, 1972, and it became front page news in the New York Times the following day. Following that, Senator Edward Kennedy called congressional hearings at which Buxton and other officials were called to testify. And as a result of the public outcry, the CDC and PHS appointed a panel to review the study. The panel found that the men that participated in the study, they did agree to certain terms of the experiment, such as examination and treatment. However, they were not informed of the study's actual purpose. The panel then determined that the study was medically unjustified and ordered its termination immediately. In 1974, as part of the settlement of a class action lawsuit filed by the NAACP on behalf of study participants and their descendants, the U.S. government paid $10 million and agreed to provide free medical treatment to surviving participants and surviving family members infected as consequence of the study. Congress created a commission empowered to write regulations to deter such abuses from occurring in the future. And recently, in 2019, the government paid another $51.8 million to participants and their descendants. Now, back in 1997, in May, President Bill Clinton formally apologized and held a ceremony at the White House for surviving study participants. And he said during that address, "What was done cannot be undone, but we can end the silence. We can stop turning our heads away. We can look at you in the eye and finally say, on behalf of the American people, what the United States government did was shameful, and I'm sorry. To our African American citizens, I am sorry that your federal government orchestrated a study so clearly racist." 5 of the 8 study survivors attended the White House ceremony. All right, guys, well, that concludes this video. As always, I'm interested to hear what you have to say, so please drop down in the comments and let me know. As always, be sure to like this video, share this video, but most importantly, be sure to subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.